Molly Booker, welcome to Paper Napkin Wisdom. I am excited, nervous, scared to have you as a guest today. Um, I think so. I said this before. You are not our normal paper napkin, but I think this is a very important and maybe taboo-ish subject that we're going to talk about here today. Your paper napkin was what others say about you is their reality, not yours. Why did you share that with me?
Well, first, thanks for having me. And I love this already. I mean, if I get introduced as not the typical, I'm like, yes, I've already nailed it. So happy to be here in the whole range of emotions too. Um, so yeah, I thought quite a bit about that. I've received a lot of wisdom in my life and given a lot. And so if I was just gonna, jot one down on a paper napkin, and I think the reason I chose that was really, um, I feel at this point in my life, as I'm almost 50, I have given way too much of my power, um, vesting in what other people think of me and their opinions. And I really have lost myself in pretty profound ways, by trying to do things the standard way, the typical way, the way that I thought they wanted to do it. And to me, I've really found success when I've stopped following that path, when I've stepped out of that, um, thought less about, the feedback that I'm getting and really trusted myself. Um, my life took a very different trajectory. And so that's one that I'd love just as an option to share with other people.
Okay, you talked about success, right? It, it and I think what is success? Like how did you define success? Like what does success have to do with any of this, right? I mean,
Right. That's that's a good question, and one that's helpful if we slow down for a few minutes to really ask, like, what does success mean? And growing up, I grew up in Colorado, and to me, growing up, success meant you know um, turning out. Like I just heard parents say that all the time. Like, I want my kids to turn out. Like, I don't even know what turn out means, but I was going for this idea of like turning out um, and doing all the things. Like, I wanted to go to a good college, I wanted to go to a good grad school, I wanted to get a good job, I wanted to get married, I wanted to have my 2.5 kids, I wanted to have a dog and a house and all the things and all the stuff. And the problem for me is the more that I climbed that ladder and the closer I got to like getting there, if there is a there to get to, the more miserable I felt, to the point where I did have the college degree. I had three master's degrees. I had a job where I was told, I'm not kidding, Molly, you can make whatever you want to make. I'll pay you whatever you want. Just continue doing what you're doing. So I had all the money I could ask for. I had all the toys and all the things, and I was more suicidal than ever. And so there was something about this success that just was not working for me. And so I really took a huge drastic turn in my life after I hit suicidal crisis, and I went back to school and pursued a degree in spiritual psychology. And I ran into somebody who said, Molly, your definition of success will impact every other single decision in your life. And I was like, wow, I hadn't even really slowed down enough to define success. And so I asked him, well, what's yours? Let me like copy of your paper a little bit. And he said, well, my definition of success is knowing who I am. I think it was, Shakespeare's to thy own self be true. And that really resonated of like, yeah, that is something that I could get my life around, and that to me felt like a game worth playing. Wasn't about, more, better, different, but I wanted something that felt really meaningful. And so since then, it's been about a 20-year journey of discovering who am I, and when that changes, when that definition of success changed, everything changed. So it wasn't how much money can I get, how many likes can I get, how much fame can I get. It wasn't about like what I'm getting or what I'm earning, but it was more about how well do I know myself. And it turned out I didn't know myself at all, like zero. And so it's been a long journey of self-discovery and realizing how much that I let other people dictate what I believed and what I thought to be true. And so there's been radical life changes. And the more that I followed this path for the first time, I've really experienced belonging, genuine love and connection, which I just could not find those things before. It seems like no matter what I tried, I just couldn't seem to connect. I couldn't feel a sense of belonging. And so it wasn't until really going inward that I started to experience those things that I'd always been after, which is peace, joy,
I think that's
contentment.
amazing. And you so much in what you said in that share. But let's not go past this quickly, right? I mean,
Sure, sure.
you talked about suicidal ideation. You talked about that being something that you carried for decades, right? I mean, you
Mm-hmm.
said 20 years. It took you 20 years to sort of find yourself, but I think that in truth, you shared that this suicidal ideation was something that was part of how you felt for a long time as you climb that ladder along the way, the ladder of expectation, the ladder um, of turning out, as you talked about it. How did you when did you discover, or when did you notice that you had those ideas? When did you notice that you were thinking about suicide?
Um, I started first having thoughts of suicide at 16. Um, and I think it first started like, I think the world would be better if I just wasn't in it. Or I wish I would just die in a car accident, or I wish I just wouldn't wake up. And then that just kept getting worse and worse and worse, where I just didn't know how to do life. It just is like, if this was what life is, I'd rather not do it. It's so incredibly painful for me. And the pain was really, I just felt like I'm not good. I'm not a good person. I can't offer anything. And there's really two things that make up suicidal ideation. One is thwarted belongingness. I don't belong where I once did. And so I think that's a huge piece of suicidal ideation, is this sense of belonging. And I didn't feel like I belonged anywhere. I didn't feel like I belonged at school. I didn't belong at home. It was kind of circling back to this idea of like, everything that I thought, it's like I got the feedback that's not good. So I grew up as a tomboy and I got teased all the time. And so from very early on, it's like, well, what I want to wear is not okay. I was not allowed to shop in the boys section. It was like, no, that's only for boys. That's not what girls do. And so it's like I learned that my inner knowing, my inner expression, like wasn't good. And so then it's like, okay, well, what if what I know to be true and what I like isn't good? Then I'll just shove all that aside because I want to belong, I want to fit in, and I'll just go with what people are telling me. So I started dressing more like a girl and doing things that people told me to do. And that right there was the biggest injury. That was the biggest suffering, is I thought I couldn't belong anywhere because I wasn't like enough of a girl, or I wasn't smart enough,
You
or
weren't turning
all
out. You weren't
I wasn't
turning out
turning
what?
out, right? And just
Yeah,
this
yeah.
like panic in me that just was in me all the time of like, hey, I'm not turning out. I'm not a success here. I don't offer anything to anybody, which is the other part of suicidal ideation. So one is like thwarted belonging, I don't belong. And the other one is you feel like a burden. So I felt like I just make things worse. I'm a hassle for everybody. And so from that mindset of I don't have anything to offer. In fact, I make things worse. To me, in my mind, the kindest thing I could do would be remove myself from the planet because I'm a negative.
And you were
And
feeling that at
so
16.
I was feeling that at 16 all the way till I hit 35. I had never told a soul about it. I just suffered all the time with it. I tried to kill myself a few times, and then it's like, I can't even do that right. Man, I am just like a failure in all areas. But I think a lot of it stemmed from really listening as a kid that, hey, my expression is not right. that I gave away all my power as a kid. And it's like, hey, man, I mean, I think there's a couple ways to look at it. Like, well, this is what I love, deal with it, and I didn't do that at all. I did the opposite of like, well, I must be wrong then, and your way what must be right. But I think that is what a lot of people are suffering with right now, is that they don't feel like this lack of belonging. Like, I'm so alone. I still haven't found what I'm looking for. This idea of searching, and is this it? Is this all there is? And I think one of the greatest pains is when we abandon our own truth. Um, we think
So,
somebody else is going to have a better truth for us.
first of all, it's a very emotional thing to hear that you suffered with that for 19 years.
Mm,
Um, no one should feel that way, and I'm thrilled that you were unsuccessful, because we're having this great
right.
conversation right now. So I'm
Yeah.
excited for that. Um, I think this idea of turning out success is something that leaders also face. I mean, I think a lot of people face this, and I think a lot more people face this than we even really understand,
Hmm.
because there's so much shame in either or both or some combination of these thoughts. And then maybe there's even your heart and head are at quarrel with one another. They're
Yeah.
fighting because your head says, no, that's not logical, but your heart's feeling all this pain, and you don't have the understanding, or the shame takes over and you can't express it. Does that resonate? Is that
Yeah,
accurate?
I've heard a few people talk about heart-centered leadership, and having leaders at the top that really lead that way, lead from the heart. They lead with honesty and vulnerability. It's these things that it's kind of like, for me at least, I've held it all backwards. I thought like, oh, vulnerability is weak and I can't let anybody see these parts of me. I just need to, like put on a successful face, and I'm going to tell this person that's interviewing me whatever they want to hear so I'll get this job, and I'm going to say whatever I think this college wants to hear so I'll get in. And man, what a miss. I didn't get to really share me. So maybe I wasn't the greatest fit for that team or that school, but I never gave anybody a chance, because it's like, hey, I'm trying to be who you want me to be. But could we lead from a more heart centered space? And I think those businesses that are doing it right now, I mean, man, it is like electric. It's like magnetic. We just really want a part of that. We want somebody to give us permission to be who we are. We want more of that in the world. That that vulnerability, that authenticity, that those safe spaces just to say, hey, this is my truth. And I think that's one thing that we really need to do with suicide, is to be able to talk about it. I couldn't talk about it. And as long as I couldn't talk about it, there was a whelm of shame in it. And the first time that I was able to like speak those words out, I think about killing myself all the time, the ideation decreased substantially. And so
Just
I think
speaking
there's
the
a
words,
just speaking the words.
just speaking about how
Yep,
you felt changed the
yep,
ideation.
yep.
Wow. So
So just by, I'm just going to throw something in there
yeah.
real quick. Just by asking somebody that question, are you thinking of killing yourself? You can reduce their suicidal ideation and crisis substantially. Because what you're doing is they're not no longer alone suffering with this, feeling isolated with all that shame. Just by asking the question, you've invited them into a conversation, and right there's connection.
So
And
let's talk let's
that's,
talk
yeah,
let's talk about that, because this is the important
yes,
thing. I think a lot of
yep,
people don't know how to help somebody in pain.
agree,
And
yep.
here's the thing that I always say. I always say, if someone's walking around with a cast on their arm, there is no hesitation in walking up to them and saying, "Hey, what happened to your arm?"
Yeah.
But if we can see someone is sad and in pain, unhappy, there seems to be um, a greater degree of reluctance, a greater degree of shyness about saying, "Hey, are you upset?" Is there, so in your experience, you've done a lot of work in this space.
Hmm.
You know, you've been you've done the work you needed
Yeah.
in the space. So let's what's the risk of saying, hey, are you sad? Are you thinking that the world would be better without you? What's the risk in saying that to somebody? Is that, can we screw that up? Can you plant that idea for somebody that,
No, there's a lot of misunderstandings about suicide, and one
'cause I
is
think
that if
that,
you,
right? I think if
yeah,
you
if
say,
you
hey, are you
ask
trying to kill
somebody about,
yourself? Yeah,
yeah,
they're going to want to do it. Oh,
I didn't have
Eureka.
that idea. Oh
Yeah.
God, why didn't I think of that?
Yeah.
That's just not at all how it works. At all. You're either like having that ideation and having those thoughts, or you're not. But if you're not in that space, not considering suicide, and somebody asks you, people are just really happy to correct you. Well, I'm not thinking of killing myself, but here's what is going on, and it's really bad. So really, the risk is in not asking. Because if we don't say anything and we don't ask, we risk losing that person to suicide. We risk the opportunity to intervene
And
by
the
asking
person
the.
in pain isn't going to come and advertise this easily, right? It's hard for the
It's
person who's in pain because they're
hard, and I.
feeling that they don't belong. They're
Yep,
feeling like they're a burden. So them
yep,
saying, here's my blah,
yeah.
is,
It's more of it, right?
yeah.
And it gets like stuck in your throat. It's the weirdest thing. Like I was desperate for people to know, and it would get like so close, and I just like I literally like couldn't make the words come out. But I was working with a life coach once, that it was just kind of by happenstance that I started in on this conversation, and we were talking about public speaking, and I wanted to write a book and talk about it, and so we were talking about that, and he just after a few minutes looked over and was like, "Molly, what are you so afraid of?" And I just kind of looked at him, and when like somebody's looking and they know, kind of thing. And I paused and I looked at him, and he looked back at me and he said, "You can trust me." And I was like, oh my God, I think he's reading my mind, because I was like, I want to trust you, but I don't know if I can. And he said, I know you don't think you can trust me, but you can. And then I just like, I didn't even prepare it. It just came out. Like, I think about killing myself all the time. And I was shocked that it came out of my mouth. So really, it didn't take somebody who was an expert in suicidal ideation. He hadn't taken any classes, had no experience with that. But really, it was just somebody who slowed down enough to use that inner knowing, right? That intuition to say something feels off. And he didn't initially think like, "Hey, are you suicidal?" But he's like, "Something feels off by the way that you're talking," and I would avoid all these different subjects.
Mm.
Um, and so I think if we have that inner knowing, if we have that inner nudge of like something feels off, or somebody's not themselves, or somebody seems sad or upset, the thing that we can do is get curious, ask.
And
You
I
know.
tend to believe that we all as humans um, leave out strings for people to pull on,
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
right? Like I think about it as
totally.
this ball, and we're all a ball, a mesh of stuff, but there are strings that we leave out. And it's not because we're testing people, but we think in that moment that if they care enough, they'll see it. And if I matter to
Mm-hmm.
them, they'll pull on it. And I think we all do that. And I think it's really, I love what you said. He slowed down enough to really look at you. And I think that that's something we all need to do. And leaders, especially, have this sort of honor to lead, this privilege to permit people to be their best selves. And that empowerment involves pulling at those strings, involves, you know, find, listening for them and being
Right.
there.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so true. I think, slowing down with another human being is, I mean, it's amazing. It's just the gift of giving somebody presence and just listening to what they have to say. And whatever that may be, of like, hey, it seems like maybe you're lost, like if somebody just needs directions, or, hey, you just don't seem yourself today, you know? The
So
fact that somebody noticed is ginormous. And, I've talked to so many people who have been suicidal. I mean, I've been in this work for a long time, and a lot of people will say, man, it is the smallest action that prevented me from taking my life that day. Sometimes it's just somebody looks at you and says hi. That's enough. So I think there's this misunderstanding that if somebody's in suicidal crisis, that it's so complicated and it is so tricky that we only need to leave that to the experts, the
Mm,
psychologists and the psychiatrists, and I might mess it up if I do anything. And actually it's the opposite. The way to mess it up is to not do nothing, because it just makes that person feel more invisible. But any act of anything, just hi, a wave, or hey, I'm here. There was two things that people would say that were so profoundly helpful for me when I was in that suicidal depression, which is you're not alone, which I think is true of every human being. I think there is a string that connects every one of us. So you're not alone and you are so loved. So I think if you got nothing else out of this podcast, if we just did that one thing, if we just got a little more generous with saying, I love you to those that we truly love.
beautiful.
What if we just slow down a little with our kids and just
Um,
looked them in the eye, I love you, or our spouses or our grandparents or our friends.
it's a powerful words, and I think that we're all, and especially I think people who are in leadership roles, people who are leaders, have a definition of success, and a lot of it is if I achieve, I will get. If I achieve, it's goal centered, and there's values. There's a value in having goals. There's a value in being goal oriented. There's a value in all those things, but there's at the same time, um, based on your experience, but when you're chasing the goal to be happy, there's a danger in that, and you're grateful to be happy. Gratitude is the pathway to
Right.
happiness,
Yeah.
not success. And then if you're happy, you'll be
Yeah.
more successful, but
Yeah.
that's another thing, right?
Yeah. I think there's this other thing that really, really gets in the way. And growing up, I had this idea of like being a professional. Like, I'm going to have my professional clothes and my professional self. And when I go to work, I need to be professional. And I feel like leaders get in this trap of like, oh, well, that's personal. I'm going to stay out of somebody's personal business. This is work. So we have work and we have home, and these are two separate things. Well, if you are, feeling suicidal, you don't just leave that at the door when you go to work. Like, oh, well, I'll just pick up feeling suicidal when I'm done with work for the day. Or if your kid is struggling and having crisis, you don't leave that at the door. Your kid's having a hard time. Well, man, that stays with you all day. So the fact that we can, or the idea that we can try to separate these things is ridiculous. But I think that in a leadership position, if we can lead with a heart and say, hey, what, like, hey, I heard you're going through a divorce. Man, that is really tough. How are you doing with it? It is going to impact profoundly how they show up at work, or if they got a DUI, or right, or somebody in their life died. These things that's like, well, I don't want to get in somebody's business, like, oh my gosh, this is another human being going through something hard. And if we can bring all of ourselves to the things that we love to do in the world, the way that we like to serve, I think that that just really transforms the business environment to be one where, hey, I got to button it up and I got to have all my stuff handled and I got to be perfect here. I can't let anybody see any cracks. That really contributes to the suicidal ideation, because if something starts to slip, it's like, oh man, I've just ruined it. I've ruined my image, But if you're in a environment that's like, hey, we own our mistakes and we're transparent and we're open and we're honest, and I know who your kids are and I know what you're going through, and hey, it's all of it. Like, we don't stop being human with all of our messiness when we come to work. And if we could just embrace that as part of our culture, I think people would feel more connected in all walks of life.
And that's especially true for the leader, because the leader
Yeah,
is very often isolated, right? Leaders often feel alone
very much
at the
so.
top of
Yeah.
the hill,
Yeah.
uh, and I think this not belonging. I'm not like my team. My team is over there, and I'm over here. Um, I've got all these burdens that I can't share with anybody, and so many. There's so many sad stories of people feeling that way as an entrepreneur, and doing something very destructive to
Yeah.
themselves, to their families. And so I think that the message here is, if you're in that position and feeling that way, you're not alone, and
Right.
you are loved, and there are places to go for this kind of thing, for support. And everyone has that ability. So if you're listening, that's the message that I would say. But beyond that, you were in this position. So let's rewind. 35 years old, you're having this conversation, and you spill your ideation, um, and you say this is how you were feeling. You think about killing yourself all the time. What happened after that?
Yeah, my greatest fear was that if somebody knew that I thought about killing myself, that they would hate me for that, because I hated myself for it. I heard like suicide is a sin, and so I'm like, oh, somebody's gonna know that I'm even worse if they knew this about me. And so then it just came out. I think about killing myself all the time. And this this man that I mean, I'd only known him for a couple of weeks. He just looked at me and he's like, "You know what? I love you now." And like, those words saved my life for sure. But this idea that I could be lovable, or that telling him my truth actually made me lovable, was the opposite of what I thought was going to happen. I thought if I told the truth, that I would be even more rejected, like that I would be shunned or isolated, or um, cast aside even more than I already was feeling that. But the response was opposite. It was like, oh my gosh, I can feel your pain, and I so thank you for trusting me with this information, which are really, I think if somebody says, hey, I'm thinking of killing myself, or I don't see any point to living, or you get any hint of that, a great thing to say is thank you. Thank you for telling me. I'm so glad to know, like, hey, maybe I don't know what the next step is, but we'll figure it out together. I'm just so glad you told me. So I think, to me, that began to change everything, of maybe what I thought to be true wasn't true, because I immediately got an experience that was counter to what I thought it was going to be. And so if this one person can love me knowing this, or this one person love me because I said it, not just in spite of it, um, then maybe I am lovable. And so I just started getting curious. I also was so tired of being afraid. I was so tired of being afraid of suicide. And it's like, you know what? I'm going to talk about it, and I'm going to shed some light on this, because I don't want to be afraid of it anymore. I don't want to be afraid for myself. I don't want to be afraid for other people. I want to know more about it. I want to know how I can help. So I just really leaned in, and that was been several decades now of doing that intervention, prevention work. But I think that's one thing that we can do. The more we talk about it, the more light it shines on it, and the more it just makes that an acceptable thing to say, of like, hey, I'm having thoughts of suicide. Great. Thanks for letting me know. Let's get you connected to some resources.
Mhm. So you're the things that mattered was hearing that you're not alone, hearing that you're loved, you're so loved, is the words that
Mm-hmm.
you said. And thank you for sharing that with me. Those those are the key things for anyone, um, listening, as a place to lean out. I want to ask you, what changed, other than you said the ideations went way down.
Yeah.
Did your did your definition of success start to change? Did your definition of turning out and chasing happy change? What does that
Um,
look like now? How do you how do you
yeah.
do those things
Um,
now?
well, there was one huge, huge thing that really shifted in my life. And, um, when I was leaving work, and I knew that I was going to go home and kill myself. I'd been thinking about it for 23 years and trying it. So I now knew how I was going to do this. And as I was driving home, I just felt this incredible peace. which to me was like, wait a second, I'm still here. Like I haven't done anything yet. Why do I feel peaceful? And so I was kind of getting curious in that moment. And then this like new idea came in. It was one that I honestly had never had before. And that's, what if I live my life for myself? What if I live my life for me? And it was so radically different because I was all about living my life first to please my parents and then to please my teachers and to please my bosses. I wanted to be liked. I wanted to be good enough. I wanted to turn out. And I was trying to be all these things. I was trying to be all things for all people all the time.
Other
And
than
I
you.
didn't know who, yeah, I didn't even know who I was. And so
Mm.
I was like, well, I can kill myself anytime, but let me check this thing out. Like, I don't even know what that would look like if I live my life for myself. And I was like, okay, well, what do I love to do? I didn't know. I didn't know one thing that I love for myself. It took 2 weeks, and I found myself like smiling watching Denver Bronco football. I didn't know anybody who was a Denver Bronco fan. They sucked for a long time, and so I was
Yeah, I'm
like, this
sorry you
is
picked the
one thing.
Broncos. Sorry, Molly.
Right, right. But I'm like, I find joy out of watching football. Okay, that's one thing, and if there's one thing, I can find more. And I'm still on that journey of, what do I love, what brings me joy. And that kind of circles us all the way back to my napkin of, like listening to myself and really honoring my own truth and really living a life that feels authentic to me, and trusting my wisdom, my truth, my voice.
um, I know that we can speak for a long time on this
Mm,
subject, and I'd love to pick this up again. But I want to
yeah.
say I am so grateful that you came on to Paper
Mm,
Napkin Wisdom. I'm so glad that you shared your perspective. You are not alone, and you are so loved. And I'm
ah,
so grateful that I had this time with you.
yeah.
It was emotional for me because I know people who have been through
Mm,
this,
yeah.
uh, and I think that a lot of leaders, I think way more leaders than we know, uh,
Yeah.
struggle with this kind of thing.
Yeah.
So if you're listening, you're not alone. You are loved, and there are places, including me, like reach out on Paper Napkin Wisdom.
Yeah.
Molly, you have resources as well. We'll include those in the show notes.
Sure.
There's lots of places where people can go. Uh,
And I'd
and
also say, anybody out there that is having thoughts of suicide, feeling alone, struggling, um, there's somebody you can call right now, and that's the National Suicide Lifeline. And that's 1-800-273-8255. So know that at any moment, at any time, there is somebody that you can call. There's a lot of other resources, but I just wanted to leave one that, here is a number where people, that's their passion. They want to talk to you. That's what they're there for. They're great at it. So
so give
yes,
me that
thank you
number
for,
again, Molly.
yeah, 1-800-273-8255.
All right. I
And
am so grateful for that.
thank you for the conversation. There's not a whole lot of people that are willing to have it. So thank you. And I'm blessed to be able to talk about it a little bit, share a little bit of my story.
Thank you.
Thank you.